There is a watch brand that has spent decades making some of the most technically precise, most beautifully finished, and most emotionally arresting timepieces on Earth. And most of the Western watch world still hasn't caught up to it. Grand Seiko doesn't advertise like Rolex. It doesn't have boutiques on every luxury high street. It doesn't manufacture a waitlist to make you feel special. It just makes extraordinary watches and lets them speak. And they are speaking louder than ever in 2026. Here's the uncomfortable truth this list is built around. The best watch on this countdown is not just the finest Grand Seiko money can buy. It is a genuine challenger to anything produced in Switzerland at any price. That is not enthusiasm talking. That is a caliber specification, a dial finishing standard, and a movement philosophy that the Swiss establishment has spent years refusing to acknowledge because acknowledging it would cost them customers. Today, we are ranking the 10 best Grand Seiko watches you can buy right now. From the entry point that quietly outperforms watches at double its price, to the mechanical masterpiece sitting at number 1 that makes collectors rethink everything they thought they knew about haute horlogerie. Let's get into it. Number 10. Grand Seiko SBGR 261. Every list needs a starting point that makes the argument before a single word of praise is spoken. The SBGR 261 does exactly that. At first glance, this is a clean, restrained, 3-hand dress watch in a 37mm stainless steel case. Classic proportions, white dial, no complications demanding attention. And then you look closer. The Zaratsu polishing on this case is the conversation. Developed in-house at the Shizukuishi Watch Studio, Grand Seiko's Zaratsu technique produces a distortion-free mirror finish on curved surfaces that Swiss manufacturers at double and triple this price point struggle to replicate. You can see yourself in the case flanks with zero ripple, zero imperfection. That's not luck. That's a process the brand has spent half a century perfecting. Inside beats the 9S65 automatic movement, offering a 72-hour power reserve with the kind of regulation accuracy, plus or minus 5 seconds per day, that exceeds official chronometer certification standards. The bracelet is solid, the clasp engineered to tolerances that feel like precision instruments because they are. This is the watch that teaches you what Grand Seiko is. Not complicated, not theatrical, purely, ruthlessly excellent. At around $4,800 to $5,500, the SBGR 261 is the most instructive purchase you can make in the Grand Seiko catalog. Number 9. Grand Seiko SBGA 2111 Snowflake. If the SBGR 261 teaches you what Grand Seiko is, the SBGA 211 shows you what Grand Seiko feels like. And that is an entirely different education. The Snowflake is arguably the most recognized dial in the entire Grand Seiko catalog. The textured white dial, inspired by the snow-covered forests of the Shinshu Highlands surrounding the Shinshu Watch Studio where it was produced, achieves something that very few watch dials ever manage. It changes. In flat light, it reads as soft and matte. In direct light, the texture catches and scatters brilliance across the surface like light across fresh snow. You are not looking at a static object. You are looking at something alive. The SBGA 211 runs on Grand Seiko's spring drive movement. Caliber 9R65. And this is where the conversation about technical credibility becomes unavoidable. Spring drive is not automatic. It is not quartz. It is a third category of movement that uses a mechanical mainspring for power and a tri-synchro regulator to achieve accuracy of plus or minus 1 second per day. That is a quartz-level specification achieved through a mechanical philosophy. The Swiss have no equivalent. Titanium case, 70-hour power reserve, and a dial that has made grown collectors pause mid-sentence when they first see it in real life. At $5,500 to $6,200, the Snowflake is not just a watch, it is an argument. Number 8. Grand Seiko SBGN 003 Sport Collection. Grand Seiko proves it can go in a completely different direction without losing a single step in execution. The SBGN 003 is the brand's answer to the modern sport watch, and it is an answer that refuses to copy anyone. The 43.8mm stainless steel case is bold without being cartoonish, wearing with the kind of wrist authority that modern collectors demand from a sport piece. The blue sunburst dial is vivid and purposeful, and the bracelet integration is one of the strongest design statements Grand Seiko has made in this category. This is a watch designed to be noticed. But Grand Seiko didn't abandon what it does best in the pursuit of sports credentials. The 9SA5 movement inside the brand's own dual impulse escapement caliber delivers 80 hours of power reserve and plus or minus 3 seconds per day accuracy from an in-house movement that was designed from the ground up. Not sourced from a supplier. That matters. It means Grand Seiko controls every mechanical decision in this watch, from the mainspring material to the pallet fork geometry. Water-resistant to 100 meters with a screw-down crown, this is a sport watch with the finishing standard of a dress watch and the movement credentials of a manufacturer. At around $5,800 to $7,000, the SBGN003 is Grand Seiko, entering the sport watch conversation with complete confidence. Number 7. Grand Seiko SBG WW35. We have a watch that is the complete philosophical opposite of the SBGN003, and it is every bit as compelling. The SBGW35 is Grand Seiko's hand-wound dress watch, small at 38mm, powered by the 9S64 caliber, and finished to a standard that demands to be experienced in person before any description does it justice. This is a watch for people who understand that the most difficult thing in design is achieving perfection through simplicity, not complexity. The white dial carries a subtle texture that references traditional Japanese washi paper. The Zaratsu polished case reaches a mirror standard that makes the SBGR261 look like a starting point by comparison. The hand-chamfered movement components visible through the exhibition caseback are finished with the same obsessive care as the exterior, because at Grand Seiko, there is no such thing as a surface that will not be seen. The hand-wound movement creates a relationship with the watch. You wind it. You feel the mainspring tensioning. You are not passive about wearing it. And the 72-hour power reserve means that relationship is forgiving. You won't be punished for a distracted morning. At $5,200 to $6,000, the SBGW235 is a watch that makes everyone who tries it on quietly ask themselves why they ever thought they needed something bigger, louder, or more complicated. Number 6. Grand Seiko SBGA407 Spring Drive. The spring drive philosophy meets a dial that stops the conversation in any room. The SBGA407 is part of Grand Seiko's ongoing series of nature-inspired dials from the Shinshu studio. And in this reference, the inspiration is the deep blue of Japanese twilight skies reflected across still mountain water. That description is not poetic license. The dial production process for a watch like this involves layers of translucent lacquer applied by hand, pigment distribution techniques that cannot be mechanically replicated, and a quality control threshold so strict that the rejection rate for dials at the Shinshu studio is a figure Grand Seiko discusses with the quiet pride of people who refuse to cut corners. What arrives on your wrist cleared standards that most of what it passed in the process did not. The 9R65 spring drive movement returns here with its 70-hour power reserve and that singular plus or minus 1 second per day accuracy specification. The titanium case keeps the weight down without sacrificing surface finish quality. The bracelet deploys a clasp mechanism that adjusts in half-millimeter increments for comfort. The kind of detail that sounds minor until the first time you wear a watch that has it and every watch that doesn't feel slightly wrong by comparison. At $6,500 to $7,500, the SBGA 407 is the spring drive in its most persuasive visual form. It does not make the argument for the technology. The dial makes the argument before the technology gets a word in. Number 5. Grand Seiko SLG A09 Seasons Collection, where Grand Seiko stops being a compelling alternative to Swiss watchmaking and starts occupying its own space entirely. The SLG A009 is the opening statement of that argument. Part of the Seasons Collection, Grand Seiko's most celebrated dial series, released in limited editions tied to specific natural phenomena, observed around the Shinshu and Shizukuishi studios. The SLGA009 captures the texture and palette of the Japanese forest in transition. The dial is not printed. It is not photographically reproduced. It is a layered, handcrafted surface where light behaves differently depending on the angle of your wrist, the strength of the source, and the distance at which you observe it. This is watchmaking that borrows from lacquerware, textile craft, and painting traditions that predate modern manufacturing by centuries. The fact that it arrives inside a precision mechanical instrument with an 80-hour power reserve and a movement regulated to plus or minus 3 seconds per day is a technical achievement that belongs in a different category of admiration entirely. Limited availability means the secondary market for Seasons Collection pieces almost always exceeds retail. Collectors who understand this buy at launch and never regret it. At $9,500 to $12,000 retail, one commerce bau scalp with secondary market premiums on certain references. The SLGA009 is the first watch on this list that functions as both a personal treasure and a demonstrably sound investment. Number 4. Grand Seiko SB DZ003 High Beat GMT. Grand Seiko answers the one practical question that luxury sport watch buyers always ask. What about a second time zone? The SBGZ03 delivers that answer in a case that represents the brand's most aggressive design language to date, and it commits to that direction without apology. The SBGZ03 is powered by the 9SA5 caliber, Grand Seiko's dual impulse escapement movement, running at a high beat 36,000 vibrations per hour, with a GMT complication layered on top of that mechanical foundation. This is not an off-the-shelf movement with a GMT module bolted to it. This is an integrated complication within a manufacturer movement that Grand Seiko spent years developing. The distinction matters to anyone who cares about what they are actually wearing. The dial, Zubata, available in a deep forest green reference that has generated significant secondary market attention, uses the same layered texture approach as the Seasons collection, but applied to a sportier silhouette. The 44.2mm case in stainless steel wears large and wears it with authority. The bracelet is one of the finest in the sport watch category in terms of comfort, adjustment, and finish quality parity with the case. At $9,000 to $10,500. The SBG-Z03 is Grand Seiko's statement that it can build a GMT watch that outperforms, outfinishes, and out-engineers the Swiss competition at comparable prices. And the movement specification makes that statement almost impossible to argue with. Number 3. Grand Seiko SBGA Brung 3 Shunbun. Each one is extraordinary, and the reason the SBGA 423 Shunbun sits at number 3 is not because it is less capable than what follows. It is because what follows is in a category that almost doesn't have peers anywhere in the watch world. The Shunbun, named for the Japanese vernal equinox, the precise moment when winter transitions to spring, captures cherry blossom season in a dial that is one of the most technically demanding and visually arresting surfaces Grand Seiko has ever produced. The pale pink hues shift across the textured surface as light changes throughout the day. Early morning indoor light reads differently than direct afternoon sun. The watch actively participates in the hours you wear it. Powering the Shunbun is the 9R65 spring drive, regulated to plus or minus 1 second per day, operating with the signature silence that defines spring drive wear. No tick, no vibration artifact from a high-frequency escapement, just the fluid sweep of a hand driven by a mainspring and governed by a regulator that has no equivalent in Swiss horology. The 41mm platinum case, yes, platinum, elevates the Shunbun into a material category most watch brands reserve exclusively for their most elevated complications. At $18,000 to $22,000, this is not a watch for everyone. It is a watch for people who recognize when something genuinely irreplaceable has been created. Number 2. Grand Seiko SLG H005 White Birch. The watch that most Grand Seiko collectors would tell you deserves the top spot. The SLG H005 White Birch is one of the most celebrated modern Grand Seiko references ever produced. And the secondary market response to it has been one of the clearest signals the watch industry has sent in years that something fundamental has shifted. The dial represents the white birch forests of the Shinshu highlands in winter, specifically the contrast of white bark against deep shadow when snow has stripped the canopy and the tree trunks stand in relief against gray sky. The texture, achieved through a process of hairline finishing at multiple angles across a surface that also carries a reflective gradient, creates depth that photographs cannot communicate and words can only approximate. you need to hold this watch. Inside is the 9SA5 caliber, Grand Seiko's flagship in-house movement. Beating at 36,000 vibrations per hour, with an 80-hour power reserve and a bilateral winding efficiency, that means the rotor generates power on both rotational directions. The finishing on the movement components under the exhibition caseback matches the dial standard. Every surface in this watch was finished as though it would be the most scrutinized thing produced that year. At $12,000 to $16,000 retail, with secondary market premiums frequently exceeding 20 to 30% above that figure. The white Birch is an object of desire, a mechanical achievement, and a financial reality that tells you the watch world has noticed what Grand Seiko is doing. Definitively. Number 1, Grand Seiko SBGZ05 High Beat, 36,000. The SBG05 is powered by the 9SA5 caliber, Grand Seiko's dual impulse escapement, free sprung balance, 36,000 vibrations per hour, in-house from conception to regulation. It delivers 80 hours of power reserve. It is regulated to plus or minus 3 seconds per day. And the dual impulse escapement at its core was engineered specifically to reduce friction at the point of mechanical engagement where traditional lever escapements lose energy, improving both efficiency and accuracy simultaneously. The Swiss have the lever escapement. They have the coaxial escapement. Grand Seiko designed an entirely different solution to the same fundamental problem, arrived at a specification that the finest Swiss manufacture movements struggle to match, and put it inside a watch that costs a fraction of what comparable Swiss complications demand. The 40mm white gold case is Zaratsu polished to a standard that Grand Seiko's own craftspeople describe as a personal benchmark, not a production target. The silver dial carries faceted hour markers that interact with light through deliberate geometry. The 9SA5 movement visible through the exhibition caseback is finished with the same techniques applied to the external surfaces of the case, because at Grand Seiko, the back of the watch is not a concession. It is another surface. This is the watch that makes serious collectors quiet when they pick it up. Not because they can't find words, but because the words available don't quite cover the distance between what they expected and what they are holding. At $20,000 to $24,000, the SBG 005 High Beat 36,000 is not the most expensive watch on this list, but it is the most complete one, the most technically advanced, the most finished, and the most honest argument that Grand Seiko has fully arrived at a place where comparison to any Swiss house at any price is not only fair, it is overdue.